What if the people you trusted with your life are exactly the ones who will leave you to die? And what if you already know it? And what if, even knowing it, you cannot stop yourself from trusting them again? Think about that for a moment. Not as a story, as a question about your own life. Because everyone listening to me right now has at least one name they could put into that sentence. One face, one memory, one moment where the signs were everywhere and you chose not to see them. My name is Luna. I am the one who tells stories that should have been told differently the first time. And tonight, I am going to walk you through the 7 days of a man named Arian Stormhold. 28 years old, the only SS rank seer humanity ever produced. The man who could see disasters before they happened. The man who saved entire cities by reading the future like a page in a book. And the man who could not see the 3 knives that were waiting for him behind his own back. 5 years he led them.
5 years he carried them. Cassian Vale, the swordsman with the easy smile. Miriam Hollows, the healer who used to cry when his wounds were too deep. Dren Karsh, the scout who said he owed Arian his life after that night in the Busan tunnels. 5 years of monsters and broken cities and meals shared over fires built in the bones of dead skyscrapers. And at the final battle, the battle that was supposed to end everything, the battle against the Abyss King himself, those 3 people looked at Arian and decided his life was no longer worth carrying. They took the artifact of salvation, the single object that could have pulled him out of the collapse zone. They took it from his belt while he was holding back the king with his last reserves of power, and they walked away. Cassian even smiled. Miriam did not look back. Dren said nothing at all. And Arian Stormhold died in the dark, with his arms broken and his back against the wall of crystallized blood, cursing their names with the last breath in his chest. His final thought was the oldest lie a dying man tells himself. If I had only known. If I had only known. And then he opened his eyes. Sunlight. The smell of dust on an old curtain. The hum of a refrigerator he had not heard in 5 years because that refrigerator had been buried under 60 meters of debris since the day the sky tore open. He blinked. He sat up. His arms moved. His arms moved without pain. His arms moved without the broken bones, without the scars, without the missing 2 fingers on the left hand. He stared at his own hand the way a man stares at a stranger's hand. And then he turned his head and he saw the calendar on the wall, and the date on the calendar said October 17th, 7 days before the day the sky tore. 7 days before the world he had buried for 5 years was even buried in the first place. He did not scream, he did not cry. Arian Stormhold was not the kind of man who screamed at miracles. He sat on the edge of his bed, and he held his own hand, and he counted his fingers. And then he counted them again, and then a soft window of pale blue light bloomed in front of his face, and a single line of text wrote itself across it. Foresight activated. Memory of past life unlocked. And then a second line, gentler, almost amused. Welcome back, Arian Stormhold. I want you to imagine that moment. Not the magic part. Forget the magic. Imagine the part where every single mistake you ever made, every betrayal you swallowed, every loan you gave to a friend who never paid you back, every kindness you gave to someone who used it against you, every late night you spent carrying someone who was already planning to drop you, every single one of those moments is suddenly placed back in your hands. Not as a memory, as a choice. The exact same choice. The exact same friend at the door. The exact same phone call, the exact same job offer, the exact same wedding invitation, the exact same evening when you should have said no and you said yes. All of it. Returned. Returned with your eyes open this time. That is what Arian Stormhold was holding in his hands when he stood up from that bed. That is the gift. And the gift is also a curse, because once you know, you can never again say, if I had only known. You will have to choose with your eyes open, and the people you love, the people you really love, will look exactly the same as the people who killed you. Their faces will not change, their smiles will not change, the warmth in their voices will not change. The information is in your head and nowhere else, and if you act on it too soon, you will look like a paranoid man who broke his own life for no reason at all. This is the burden of the seer, not seeing, seeing alone. Arian walked to his kitchen. He poured himself a glass of water from a tap that, in his old life, had stopped working 5 years ago. He drank it slowly, and then he picked up his phone. The first call he made was not to a friend, not to family, not to a lover. The first call he made was to a man named Park Jun-ho, a real estate broker who, in the old timeline, had tried to sell him an old subway maintenance tunnel for 10 million won 3 years after the apocalypse, when those tunnels became more valuable than gold because they were the only structures deep enough and reinforced enough to survive what came down from the sky. 3 years after the collapse, those tunnels cost 10 million. Right now, 7 days before the collapse, those same tunnels were considered abandoned industrial space, worth almost nothing. Worth 600,000 won, in fact, if you knew which tunnel to ask for. And Arian Stormhold knew exactly which tunnel to ask for. Park Jun-ho answered on the third ring. He sounded bored. He sounded like a man who had been selling overpriced apartments to overpriced clients all morning. Arian's voice was calm. "Mr. Park," he said, "my name is Arian Stormhold. I would like to purchase the maintenance tunnel under the old Yangchon Junction, the full one, including the secondary chambers. I will pay in cash. Today." Park Jun-ho laughed. He thought it was a prank. He told Arian that the tunnel had been on the market for 11 years, and nobody wanted it because it was a hole in the ground with 3 meters of water at the bottom and a ventilation system from the 1970s. Arian smiled into the phone. "Mr. Park," he said, "I will pay 600,000 today, in an hour. If you would like the cash, meet me at the tunnel entrance with the deed. If you would not like the cash, I will hang up and call your competitor." 47 minutes later, Arian Stormhold was the legal owner of one of the most strategically valuable pieces of real estate in the entire peninsula. Park Jun-ho counted the cash 3 times because he was sure there had been a mistake. There was no mistake. The mistake had been waiting for 11 years in an old tunnel under the city, and Arian had finally come to collect it. This is the first lesson of foresight. Foresight is not about predicting the future. Foresight is about knowing which abandoned things in the present are not abandoned at all. They are simply waiting for the right buyer. Now I want to slow down for a moment, because if I rush through this part, you will miss the most important thing. You will think this is a story about a man with magic powers. It is not. It is a story about attention. And the difference between a person who has a second chance and a person who wastes a second chance is exactly this. The second chance fantasy in every story you have ever read assumes that the hero acts immediately, decisively, without doubt. But Arian Stormhold did not act without doubt. Arian Stormhold sat in that tunnel for 2 hours after Park Jun-ho left, with the deed in his hands, and he doubted everything. He doubted whether the memory was real. He doubted whether the apocalypse would come. He doubted whether, if it did come, he could really change anything. He doubted whether he deserved a second chance at all. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about a second chance. The first chance was given to you by a kind universe. The second chance is given to you by a universe that has decided you owe it. And Arian Stormhold, sitting alone in a wet tunnel under a city that did not yet know it was about to die, finally understood what he owed. He owed the boy. There was a boy. In his old life, in the timeline that had ended with 3 knives in his back, there had been a boy named Renzo Park, 14 years old at the start of the collapse, homeless, living in the corner of an old underpass near the Han River. In the old timeline, Arian had not noticed him until 2 years after the apocalypse, by which point Renzo Park had survived alone, eating rats and drinking rainwater, and had awakened a power so terrifying that hunters from 3 different guilds tried to recruit him at the same time. Renzo Park, in the old timeline, became one of the 3 SSS rank hunters of the post-collapse era. And Renzo Park, in the old timeline, also died at the age of 17, killed by a corporation that wanted to dissect his body to study his ability. Arian Stormhold owed Renzo Park a debt. The debt was attention. The debt was that a 14-year-old boy had been sleeping in a cardboard box 1 kilometer from Arian's apartment for the entire year before the collapse. And Arian, in his old life, had walked past that underpass at least 40 times without ever once looking down. He stood up from the tunnel floor. He folded the deed and put it in his coat, and he walked on foot the 4 kilometers from the tunnel to the underpass. He walked slowly. He let himself remember everything he had failed to see the first time. Renzo Park was exactly where he was supposed to be: skinny, dark eyes, a bruise on his cheek that he had probably given himself by sleeping on a piece of concrete. He looked up when Arian's shadow fell on him. He did not flinch. He had stopped flinching a long time ago. Arian crouched down in front of him. He did not smile. He did not pretend. He looked the boy in the eyes and he said, "My name is Arian. I have a place, I have food, I have a bed. I am not a kind man, but I am not a dangerous one either. I am offering you a job. The job is to come with me right now, eat a meal, sleep in a real bed, and listen to me when I tell you that in 7 days, the sky is going to break and the world is going to end. You do not have to believe me. You have to come with me." Renzo Park looked at him for a long time. And then Renzo Park said the sentence that, in some version of the universe, every 14-year-old has been waiting their entire life to be allowed to say. Okay, that is the second lesson of foresight. Foresight is not about saving the world. Foresight is about noticing the one person you walked past the first time. By the end of the second day, Arian had moved Renzo Park into the apartment, fed him 3 meals, given him a real shower, and let him sleep for 14 hours straight. The boy did not ask questions. The boy slept the way only a child who has not slept safely in 2 years can sleep. And while he slept, Arian Stormhold sat at his kitchen table with a notebook and a pen, and he began to write down every single thing he remembered about the next 5 years of human history. He wrote down the date of the sky tier, October 24th, 7 days from the day he had woken up. He wrote down the location of the first major monster surge, Gangnam District, beneath the old shopping plaza. He wrote down the names of every corporation that would rise from the ashes and every politician who would be exposed as a profiteer in the first month. He wrote down the addresses of 7 children scattered across the city who in the old timeline had awakened powers so great that they were either weaponized or destroyed. He wrote down the names of his betrayers: Cassian Vale, 26 years old at this moment, currently working as a delivery driver in the Mapo district. Miriam Hollows, 24, a nursing student at a university in the south. Dren Karsh, 29, a private security contractor who, in 7 days, would walk into the Yangchan recruitment center looking for a chance to become a hunter. Arian wrote their names down, and he looked at them for a long time, and then he closed the notebook. He did not yet know what he was going to do about them. He knew what he was not going to do. He was not going to kill them. He was not going to warn them. He was not going to confront them. He was going to do something far worse. He was going to let them live their lives exactly as they had lived them the first time. And he was going to be standing on a higher floor when they finally looked up. The third day was the day of the second child. Her name was Sarah Lin, 10 years old, living in an orphanage in the Yunpyong district. In the old timeline, Sarah Lin had awakened a healing power at the age of 13, 3 years into the collapse, after watching her best friend die of an infection in front of her. The trauma had unlocked the gift, and the gift had been so absolute that even bones knitted under her hands. In the old timeline, she had been recruited by a guild, used until she was 19, and abandoned when the guild master decided her power was running thin. She was alive, somewhere in the old timeline. Alive, but broken. Arian went to the orphanage. He did not bring flowers. He did not bring a cover story. He went to the front desk and he said, "I would like to sponsor a child. I would like to sponsor Sarah Lynn specifically." The woman at the desk looked at him with the suspicion every honest social worker should have for any stranger who walks in asking for a specific child by name. She asked him how he knew the name. Arian said, "A mutual friend." The woman did not believe him. She told him the sponsorship process required interviews, background checks, references, and a minimum of 6 weeks. Arian said, "I understand. I would like to start the process today.
And I would also like to make a donation to the orphanage of 300,000 won, separate from any sponsorship, simply because I believe the work you do is important."
The woman's expression softened by exactly 1%. It was enough. She handed him the forms. He filled them out at her desk. He listed his real name, his real address, his real phone number. He provided a financial statement that, thanks to one phone call he had made that morning to a stock he remembered would crash on the 18th, was significantly larger than it had been the day before. The woman scanned the forms. She told him she would call him in 2 days with an answer. Arian thanked her and he left. He did not see Sarah Lynn that day. He did not need to. He needed her to be inside that building, with that woman, when the sky broke. Because the orphanage in Eunpyeong, in the old timeline, had collapsed on the second day of the apocalypse, killing 47 children.
And Arian Stormhold had remembered that fact for 5 years without ever being able to do anything about it. Now, with a notebook in his coat and a tunnel in his name, he could finally do something. He could send a structural engineer to the orphanage on the 23rd of October, the day before the sky broke, with a story about a city safety inspection, and that engineer could mark the east wall for emergency reinforcement, and the city would not get to the reinforcement in time, but the children would have been moved to the west wing for the inspection, and the west wing would survive. 47 children, saved by one phone call placed 6 days in advance. This is foresight. This is what foresight actually is. Foresight is not standing on a mountain and seeing the future. Foresight is making one phone call on a Tuesday because you remember what is going to happen on a Wednesday. Now I want to take you to the 4th day, because the 4th day is when everything almost broke. The 4th day was the day Arian Stormhold walked past a coffee shop in the Hongdae district and saw, through the window, the face of Cassian Vale. Cassian was 26 years old. He had not yet killed anything. He had not yet held a sword. He was wearing the gray jacket of a delivery company, and he was sitting at a small table with a coffee in front of him, and he was laughing at something on his phone. He looked, I want you to understand this carefully, he looked exactly like a kind man. He looked like a young man you would want as a friend. He looked like the kind of person you would lend money to without thinking about it. Because he was. That was the truth of Cassian Vale. He was, in this moment, a kind man. The cruelty had not yet arrived. The betrayal had not yet been imagined. Cassian Vale, on the 4th day before the apocalypse, was simply a tired delivery driver enjoying a coffee on his break. And Arian Stormhold stood on the other side of the glass and felt his hand begin to shake. This is the moment I want every single one of you to remember, because this is the moment that decides who Arian Stormhold becomes. If he walks into that coffee shop and confronts Cassian, the timeline shatters. If he walks past and pretends he did not see, he keeps the timeline intact and he keeps his advantage. There is no middle option. There is no honest conversation that ends well. Because what would he even say? Excuse me, in 5 years you will stab me in the back and steal an artifact from my belt. Would you like to talk about it? There is no version of that conversation that does not end with Cassian Vale calling the police. There is no version of that conversation that does not end with Arian Stormhold institutionalized, dispossessed of his tunnel, dispossessed of his boy, dispossessed of his future. So Arian Stormhold stood on the other side of the glass, and he watched a kind man drink a coffee. And he did not walk in. He turned, he kept walking, and he carried for the rest of that day a weight in his chest that no amount of foresight could lighten. Because here is the cruelest part of knowing. Knowing does not erase love. Knowing does not erase the memory of every kindness that came before the betrayal. Cassian Vale had once carried Arian on his back for 2 kilometers through a monster-infested street to get him to a healer. Cassian Vale had once given Arian his last ration bar in a winter where everyone was starving. Cassian Vale had, at one point in their friendship, been a brother. The betrayal at the end did not erase the brotherhood at the beginning. It simply meant that the brotherhood at the beginning had not been enough. And that is a different kind of pain. That is the pain of remembering that the person who killed you was once the person who saved you.
Arian Stormhold walked 4 kilometers that afternoon. He walked without a destination. He walked until his legs hurt. And when he finally came home, Renzo Park was sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of rice in front of him and a question on his face. The boy had been watching him. The boy had figured out in 3 days that the man who had taken him in was carrying something so heavy that it bent his shoulders even when he was alone. Renzo Park looked at him and he said, "Who hurt you?" Arian looked at the boy, and for the first time in 2 lifetimes, Arian Stormhold let his face do what his face wanted to do. He sat down. He put his hands on the table, and he told the boy everything. Not the magic part, not the system window or the foresight skill, just the people part, the friends part, the 5 years and the 3 knives part. Renzo Park listened. He did not interrupt. He did not ask if it was true. When Arian finished, the boy ate the rest of his rice in silence. And then he stood up, walked over to Arian, and put one small hand on Arian's shoulder. He said, "I will not do that to you." He said it the way only a child who has been abandoned can say it, which is to say, he said it like a vow carved into stone. And then he went to bed. That was the moment Arian Stormhold understood that the second life was not a replay of the first. The second life was a different life, with different people in it. And one of those different people was a 14-year-old boy who, having been seen once, had already decided to never let his rescuer be unseen again. The 5th day was the day of the corporation. There is a name I have not yet given you. The name is Halberd Industries. In the old timeline, Halberd Industries was a mid-sized defense contractor that, within 90 days of the apocalypse, had transformed itself into the largest private military and resource conglomerate in the Eastern Hemisphere. Halberd's CEO was a man named Magnus Reinhardt. Magnus Reinhardt had, in the old timeline, ordered the assassination of Renzo Park. Magnus Reinhardt had also ordered the corporate buyout that destroyed 3 of the orphanages Arian had been trying to protect. Magnus Reinhardt had also been the silent investor who, in the old timeline, had funded Cassian Vale's rise through the ranks of the hunter guilds in exchange for certain favors, including, eventually, the favor of removing Arian Stormhold from the playing field. This was the connection Arian had not understood in his old life. He had thought his betrayers had acted alone. They had not. They had been bought. Cassian had been bought with rank. Miriam had been bought with a position in a private hospital where the wealthy paid for healing in gold. Dren had been bought with a debt erased. Magnus Reinhardt had purchased the 3 knives that ended Arian Stormhold's first life, and Magnus Reinhardt had never even met him. So on the 5th day, Arian Stormhold made the second most important phone call of his second life. He called a financial journalist named Hai-Jin Yu. In the old timeline, Hai-Jin Yu had been one of the few honest journalists left after the collapse, and she had spent the last 2 years of her life trying to expose Halberd before she was found dead in her apartment under circumstances the police described as suicide. She was, at this moment, 29 years old and working for a small business newspaper. She did not know who Arian was. She did not know who Magnus Reinhardt was. She knew that someone was calling her with an anonymous tip about a defense contractor, and that she had 30 seconds to decide whether to listen. Arian's voice on the phone was steady. He said, "Miss Yu, I have documents. I have account numbers. I have the names of 3 shell companies Halberd Industries uses to move money offshore. I am going to leave a sealed envelope at the front desk of your building in 2 hours. I will not call you again. What you do with the envelope is your decision." He hung up. He had been preparing the envelope for 2 days. He had pulled the information from the corners of his own memory, from things he had overheard in the old timeline during meetings he had been allowed into because he was an SS rank seer, and people forgot to censor themselves around him. The information in the envelope was not enough to destroy Halberd. It was enough to make Halberd nervous, and a nervous Halberd would not have the bandwidth, in the next 48 hours, to consolidate its post-collapse acquisitions, which meant that when the sky broke on the 24th, Halberd would be too busy putting out a small fire in its accounting department to immediately seize the resources it had seized so efficiently in the old timeline. This is foresight. Foresight is making a corporation slightly nervous on a Friday so that a corporation cannot consolidate its empire on a Monday. The sixth day was quieter. Arian spent most of it inside the tunnel with Renzo Park, organizing supplies. He had spent the previous days making purchases, and the purchases had arrived. Water filtration units, solar panels, a diesel generator that he had bought used from a man who was selling his late father's farm equipment and had no idea what the generator was worth. Bags of rice, canned protein, antibiotics, antifungals, basic surgical supplies, 2 surgical kits, a set of textbooks on emergency medicine, a second set of textbooks on engineering, a third set on agriculture, because in the old timeline, the second year of the apocalypse had been a year of starvation, and Arian Stormhold had decided that the second year of this apocalypse would not be. Renzo Park watched him work. The boy was strong for his age, and he carried boxes that should have been too heavy for him. At one point, around the middle of the afternoon, Renzo paused with a crate in his arms, and he said, "Are there going to be more of us?" Arian looked at him. He nodded. The boy nodded back. He did not ask who. He went back to work. That evening, Arian made his 4th recruitment call. The name was Ji Hoon Cha, 16 years old, a high school student in the Songpa district. In the old timeline, Ji Hoon had awakened a power of analysis. He could look at any monster and within 2 seconds know its weak points, its rotation patterns, its escape behavior. He had been, in the old timeline, the strategic backbone of 3 different guilds and had been driven to a nervous collapse at the age of 22 by the relentless demands placed on him. Arian did not call Ji Hoon Cha to recruit him, not yet. He called the boy's mother. The mother answered the phone on the second ring. Arian introduced himself as a scout for a private academic scholarship. He said he had heard about her son's exceptional performance in mathematics. He said he would like to offer a paid internship beginning on the 25th of October, a Sunday, the day after the world ended, which the mother, of course, did not know. He said the internship paid 2 million won per month, with housing provided in a secure facility, and that her son would have the option to bring family members for visits. The mother said yes within 90 seconds. Because the mother was a single mother who worked 2 jobs, and the 2 million won would feed them for half a year. The internship paperwork would be delivered to her apartment the next morning. Arian thanked her and hung up. This is foresight. Foresight is hiring the right teenager on a Friday and giving him a reason to be inside your tunnel on a Sunday. By the night of the 6th day, Arian Stormhold had moved 4 people into his tunnel. Renzo Park, the boy who could one day burn the sky. Sarah Lynn, the girl who would heal what burned. The orphanage had approved the sponsorship that morning with surprising speed, possibly because the donation had been larger than the woman at the desk had ever seen. Sarah was sleeping in a small room near the back of the tunnel that Arian had decorated with 2 stuffed animals and a stack of children's books. Ji Hoon Cha had not yet arrived. He would arrive on the 25th, on schedule, in time to find that his internship had become a war room. And the 4th person was a man Arian had recruited in person on the morning of the 6th day. His name was Wesley Brandt, 41 years old, a former military engineer who had been quietly discharged 2 years earlier for refusing an order he considered illegal. In the old timeline, Wesley Brandt had become one of the most respected engineers in the post-collapse era. He had built the first secure water system in the Seoul refugee zone. Arian had found him at a bar at 11 in the morning, drinking alone, and had offered him a job that paid in gold, in advance, with full discretion. Wesley had asked him 3 questions. Arian had answered all 3 honestly. Wesley had finished his beer, paid his bill, and followed Arian to the tunnel. By midnight on the 6th day, the tunnel was no longer a tunnel. It was a household. A strange, small, improvised household of 1 man, 1 boy, 1 girl, and 1 engineer. 5 people, counting Arian. 5 people who, by tomorrow night, would be among the only people in the entire city who had been ready for what was coming. Arian sat alone in the main chamber of the tunnel after the others had gone to sleep. He had a cup of tea in his hand. The tea was lukewarm. He was looking at the ceiling. He was thinking about Miriam Hollows. Miriam was the one who hurt the most. Cassian's betrayal had been brutal but clear. Cassian had wanted power. Cassian had taken it. Dren's betrayal had been quiet, almost cowardly. The betrayal of a man who simply did not have the courage to refuse the others. But Miriam had been the one who held his hand through a fever. Miriam had been the one who, when his shoulder dislocated for the third time, had set it back and cried into his neck because she was so tired of hurting him. Miriam had been the one who, in the rare months when the world had felt almost safe, had laughed at his bad jokes and corrected his terrible cooking. And Miriam had looked away when the others took the artifact. She had not stabbed him. She had simply chosen not to see. That, in many ways, is the worst betrayal of all. Not the active one, the passive one. The friend who decides that your survival is no longer their problem. The lover who decides that your pain is too inconvenient. The family member who decides that your phone calls can go unanswered. Miriam Hollows had not killed Arian Stormhold. Miriam Hollows had simply allowed him to be killed. And in some ways that hurt more, because Miriam Hollows had been the one person whose seeing had once made him feel real. Arian set down his tea. He picked up his notebook. He looked at the name Miriam Hollows on the page. He looked at it for a long time. And then he closed the notebook without writing anything next to it. He did not yet know what he was going to do about Miriam. He suspected that, when she came to his gates begging for help, he would let her in. He suspected that he would let her work in the medical bay alongside Sarah Lynn. He suspected that he would never again let her hold his hand. He suspected that the worst punishment he could give her was not exclusion, but inclusion. To let her stand inside the household she had once been allowed to belong to, and to know, every day, exactly what she had thrown away. Some revenges are loud. Some revenges are quiet. And the quietest revenges are the ones that look, to an outsider, exactly like forgiveness. The seventh day arrived gray and cold. Arian Stormhold woke up before the sun. He made breakfast for 4 people. He sat at the head of the table and watched them eat. Renzo ate quickly, like a boy who still expected food to be taken away. Sarah ate slowly, picking at her rice the way a child does when she is testing whether the adults will let her be picky. Wesley ate without comment, the way a soldier eats. Arian ate nothing. He drank tea. He looked at his hands. He counted his fingers one more time. At 10 in the morning, he made the phone call to the structural engineering firm that would send an inspector to the Eunpyeong orphanage. The story was about a routine city safety check. The inspector would arrive at 2 in the afternoon. The east wall would be marked for reinforcement. The children would be moved to the west wing. Arian hung up. He went into the back chamber of the tunnel. He sat with Sarah Lynn for 20 minutes and read her a story about a rabbit who outsmarted a tiger. Sarah laughed twice. The second time, she leaned against his arm. He let her. At noon, he stood in the entrance of the tunnel and looked up at the sky. The sky was gray, ordinary gray, the kind of gray that did not look like the end of the world. He stood there for a long time. He thought about every face he had ever loved and every face he had ever lost. He thought about Cassian drinking coffee in Hongdae. He thought about Miriam studying in a library that would not exist by tomorrow. He thought about Dren walking into a recruitment center at this exact moment, filling out paperwork for a future that had already been rewritten. And then he went back down into the tunnel and he gathered his household around him. He told them, simply, that something was going to happen tonight, that they would not leave the tunnel, that whatever they heard above them, they would not go to the surface. That he had prepared the tunnel exactly for this night and that they were safe. Renzo nodded. Sarah held Wesley's hand. Wesley simply asked, when? Arian said, around midnight. Wesley said, understood. And then Wesley went to check the generator one more time. The sky tore open at 11:47 in the evening. I will not describe the tearing of the sky in detail. The published accounts of that night describe it well enough. The sound was the loudest sound that had ever been heard in a populated area. The light was the color of nothing that had ever been seen before. The first creatures that came down from the wound in the heavens were not the largest creatures, but they were the ones the survivors remembered most clearly, because they were the ones who descended through windows and walls and stopped in front of human beings to look at them with an intelligence that should not have existed. The first wave killed approximately 160,000 people in the metropolitan area within the first 3 hours. The orphanage in Eunpyeong did not collapse on the east wall. The engineer's report had been filed at 4 in the afternoon. The West Wing held. 47 children survived. They would not know for the rest of their lives that a man they had never met had saved them with a single phone call placed 6 days before they were born into the new world. Inside the tunnel, the household held. Wesley managed the generator. Renzo helped Sarah through the moments when the ground shook. Arian sat in the entrance chamber with a tablet in his hand, watching feeds from the surface, watching the city he had once lived in disappear into something else. He did not feel triumph. He did not feel grief. He felt the calm of a man who had done his work in time. At 3 in the morning, the first knock came at the tunnel gate. Arian had been waiting for it. Not this knock specifically, but a knock. The tunnel was hidden, but it was not invisible. Someone who knew the city well enough, someone who had once worked in the maintenance corridors of the old subway system, someone with foresight of a different kind, would eventually find his way to the door. Arian walked to the monitor that showed the outer chamber camera, and he looked at the face on the screen. It was an old man, maybe 70, a face Arian did not recognize. The old man was carrying a young woman in his arms. The young woman was bleeding from the leg. The old man was looking directly into the camera as if he knew it was there. Arian opened the gate. The old man's name was Chon Du-hwan. He had been the maintenance supervisor for the Yangchon Junction tunnels for 34 years before he had retired. He had known about the secondary chambers because he had built half of them. He had walked, with his granddaughter wounded in his arms, 4 kilometers through a city full of creatures to reach the only place he was certain was structurally sound. He had not known anyone was living in it. He had simply hoped the door would still open. Arian let them in. Wesley carried the young woman to the medical bay. Sarah Lynn, who in the old timeline would not awaken her healing power for another 3 years, sat next to the wounded woman and held her hand. The wound on the leg was deep but clean. Wesley closed it with 7 stitches. By dawn on the first day of the New World, the household of Arian Stormhold had grown from 5 to 7. By the end of that week, it would grow to 31. Arian had not opened the doors to strangers exactly. The strangers had found him. Because Chon Du-hwan had a daughter, who had a husband, who had a brother, who had a colleague, who had a wife. And every single one of those people, in the chaos of the first week, had needed somewhere to go. Arian let them in carefully. He turned away 3 people in the first week. He did not enjoy turning them away. He turned them away because he had recognized their faces from the old timeline as people who had eventually become predators in the refugee zones. He gave them food, he gave them water, he gave them a direction to walk in, and he closed the gate. Foresight is not only about saying yes to the right people. Foresight is also about saying no to the wrong ones. It was on the 9th day after the Sky Tour, 15 days after Arian had first opened his eyes in his old apartment, that the first of the 3 came to the gate. It was Dren Karsh. Dren was 29 years old. He had not yet awakened his power. He had not yet sharpened his cowardice into the quiet evasion that would, in 5 years, allow him to walk away from a dying friend without looking back. He was, at this moment, simply a man with empty eyes and a half-empty backpack and a bleeding cut above his eyebrow. He had walked into the Yangchon district because someone in a refugee group had whispered that there was a man living under the ground who had food and water and a working generator. Dren did not yet know the name of that man. Dren only knew that he had been walking for 3 days without food and that his backpack was lighter than it had been when he started because he had eaten everything in it. Arian saw him on the outer camera, and he sat very still for a long moment. Then he stood up. He told Wesley to monitor the gate. He walked to the entrance chamber. He opened the inner door and stood behind the outer gate, and he looked at Dren Karsh through 3 centimeters of reinforced steel. He said, "What is your name?" Dren told him. He said, "What do you want?" Dren said, "Food, water." a place to sleep for one night. I can work. I have a back and 2 hands. I can do anything you tell me to do. I do not need to stay. I just need a night. Arian looked at him for a long time. He looked at the face he had once trusted with his life. He looked at the face that had, in another life, looked away while the others took the artifact from his belt. He looked at the eyes that had refused to meet his when he was dying, and he saw, in those eyes, a man who had not yet done any of those things. A man who could still, in this new timeline, choose differently. A man who, given the right environment, might not become the man Arian had buried. This is the deepest question of foresight. Are people fixed, or are people the product of the situations they are placed in? If Dren Karsh, in the old timeline, had been a soldier who broke under the weight of 5 years of fear and 1 moment of opportunity, could a different 5 years have produced a different man? Arian Stormhold did not know the answer. He suspected that the honest answer was that some people are fixed and some people are not, and there is no way to tell the difference until the test arrives. And the test would arrive. The test always arrived. The only question was whether you arranged your life so that, when the test arrived, you were the one watching. He opened the gate. He let Dren Karsh in. He gave him food. He gave him water. He gave him a small room with a cot. He did not tell Dren his name. He let Wesley handle the introductions. He did not say one word to Dren that revealed they had ever met before. Because they had not, in this timeline. They had not yet. And Arian Stormhold had decided, in the moment he opened the gate, that he would let Dren Karsh write himself a different story. He would watch. He would test. He would, eventually, give Dren a small responsibility. And then a larger one. And then an artifact. Not the same artifact, a different one. And he would watch what Dren did with it. If Dren proved himself, the second life would be different. If Dren did not, Arian Stormhold would handle it with a quietness that would never make the newspapers. Dren slept that night in the tunnel. He did not know whose bread he had eaten. He did not know whose floor he was sleeping on. He simply knew that the man who had opened the gate had looked at him for a very long time before opening it, and that the look had felt like being weighed on a scale he did not understand. Cassian Vale arrived 12 days later. Cassian came in a group, 6 people, 2 women, 4 men. They had heard, through the increasingly organized whisper network of the survivor zones, that there was an underground compound in the Yangchan district that was accepting refugees on a case-by-case basis. Cassian was the spokesperson of the group, because Cassian was the kind of man whose face people instinctively trusted. He stood in front of the outer camera and he explained, calmly and persuasively, that his group included a former nurse, a former electrician, a former farmer, and 3 people who were willing to do any work assigned to them. He asked, politely, for a chance to speak with the person in charge. Arian Stormhold sat in the inner chamber and looked at Cassian's face on the monitor for a longer time than he had looked at Dren's. Then he stood up, and he walked to the entrance, and he opened the inner door, and he stood in front of the outer gate, and he opened a small hatch in the steel, and he looked at Cassian Vale, face to face, for the first time in this timeline. Cassian smiled at him, the same smile, the exact same smile, the smile that had once been the smile of a brother. Arian Stormhold did not smile back. He said, "Your group is welcome. Your group will be assessed individually. Each of you will be assigned work. Each of you will be given quarters. There are rules. The rules are simple. You will follow them. If you do not follow them, you will be asked to leave. There will be no second warnings." He paused. He looked at Cassian for 1 more second. He said, "My name is Arian Stormhold," and he opened the gate. Cassian's smile did not change as he walked in, because Cassian, in this timeline, did not know the name. The name meant nothing to him. He was a delivery driver who had survived 12 days of monsters and was looking for shelter. He walked into the tunnel, and he was given a small room, and he was told to report to Wesley Brandt for assignment in the morning. He went to bed that night believing that he had found, at last, a safe place. He had not. He had walked into a courtroom. He simply did not yet know it. Miriam Hollows arrived 9 days after that. She did not come in a group. She came alone. She came with a small bag on her back and a stethoscope around her neck that she had taken from the broken nursing school before it burned. She came because she had heard from a wounded man in a refugee shelter that there was a place where a healer could find work in exchange for safety. She did not know the name of the person in charge. She did not know any of the names. She had been walking for 6 days. Her shoes were worn through. Her face was thinner than Arian remembered. He watched her on the monitor for a long time. He did not go to the gate. He sent Wesley. He stood in the inner chamber and he listened, through the audio feed, as Wesley asked her the standard questions: her name, her training, her skills, her reason for coming. Miriam answered all of them honestly. She did not lie. She did not embellish. She simply said, "I am a nursing student. I have completed 3 years of training. I can stitch wounds, set basic fractures, administer most medications, and recognize the signs of 7 major infections. I have walked for 6 days because I heard that this place existed. I will work for food and shelter." Wesley opened the gate. When Miriam Hollows walked into the inner chamber, she did not see Arian at first. He was sitting in shadow at the edge of the room, behind a desk, with a lamp pointed at the floor instead of at his face. She was led past him by Wesley. She did not look up. She was tired. She was so tired that her body had forgotten how to look at faces. Wesley took her to the medical bay. He introduced her to Sarah Lynn. Sarah Lynn looked up at the tall, thin, tired woman with the stethoscope around her neck, and Sarah Lynn said, "You look hungry." And Miriam Hollows, who had not cried in 6 days, who had been holding her face together with the last muscles in her jaw, sat down on the floor of the medical bay and cried. Arian watched her from a small monitor in the next room. He watched her cry. He watched Sarah Lynn hand her a piece of bread. He watched Miriam take the bread with hands that were shaking. He watched her eat. And he felt, for the first time since the calendar had read October 17th, a feeling that was not strategy, a feeling that was not foresight, a feeling that he had no name for and no place to put. He turned off the monitor. He did not see Miriam Hollows in person for 3 more days. By the time she finally met him face to face, in the main chamber, in front of the household, she had washed, eaten 3 full meals, slept 14 hours, and been given a clean coat. She looked up at him when Wesley introduced them. She did not recognize him, because in this timeline, she had never met him. She extended her hand and she said, "Thank you for letting me stay. I will work hard. I will not be a burden." Arian took her hand. He held it for 1 second longer than was polite. He looked into her eyes and he saw, in those eyes, a woman who had not yet learned to look away. A woman who, in this timeline, might never learn. A woman who could, given time and a different 5 years, become the woman he had once believed she was. He let go of her hand. He said, "Welcome to the household." He turned and he walked away, and he did not let her see his face for the rest of the day. Because his face, in that moment, was doing things that even foresight could not control. I want to pause here because we have reached the moment in this story where the truth of it must be spoken out loud. The truth of it is this: a second life is not a victory lap. A second life is not a chance to be a better, more efficient, more powerful version of who you were the first time. A second life is a courtroom in which every single person who ever wronged you walks past you in a hallway, and you are the only one in the courtroom who knows that a trial is happening. You are the prosecutor. You are the defense attorney. You are the judge. You are the witness. You are the verdict. And you cannot share the courtroom with anyone because no one else knows the trial is happening, and if you tell them, they will think you are insane. This is the loneliness of the second life. The loneliness Arian Stormhold sat with every single night after Renzo Park and Sarah Lynn had gone to bed, after Wesley Brandt had finished his rounds, after Cassian Vale and Dren Karsh and Miriam Hollows had returned to their assigned quarters, never knowing that the man who had given them shelter had once carried their names on a list of executions and had crossed every single name out, one by one, in favor of something quieter and more honest. I want to tell you about the night, 3 weeks after Miriam arrived, when Arian Stormhold finally spoke to her alone. It was past midnight. The household was asleep. Miriam was in the medical bay, alone, restocking the shelves. She did this most nights. She did it because she could not sleep. She did it because the act of arranging bottles in a row gave her hands something to do. Arian walked into the bay quietly. He stood in the doorway. He watched her work for a long time. When she finally turned around and saw him there, she did not startle. She had heard him come in. She had simply pretended not to. She said, "You have not spoken to me directly since I arrived." He said, "No." She said, "Have I done something wrong?" He said, "No." She said, "Then why?" He looked at her. He looked at her for a long time. And then he said the only sentence he was going to allow himself to say to her in this entire second life. He said, "You remind me of someone I knew before the world ended, someone I lost. I am learning how to be in the same room as you without losing my composure. I am asking you to be patient with me while I learn." Miriam Hollows looked at him. She did not ask who. She did not ask how. She simply nodded, and she said, "Take as long as you need." He nodded back. He turned. He walked out of the medical bay. He did not allow himself to look back at her until he had reached the corridor. That was the only conversation they had alone for the entire first year of the new world. And it was enough. Because Miriam Hollows, in this timeline, became the most reliable healer in the household. She trained Sarah Lynn in basic medicine. She stitched wounds and set fractures and stayed awake for 40 hours at a stretch when an outbreak of respiratory illness moved through the tunnel in the 3rd month. She never asked Arian about the person she reminded him of. She never asked him why his eyes sometimes went distant when she laughed. She simply did her work, and she did it well. And Arian Stormhold, watching her from across the household, slowly came to understand something that he had not understood in his first life. The reason Miriam Hollows had looked away at the final battle was not that she had stopped loving him.
The reason Miriam Hollows had looked away was that, by that point, she had been worn down by 5 years of running, 5 years of fear, 5 years of carrying a healer's responsibility without ever being allowed to be tired. She had broken, and when she broke, she had chosen the easiest path, and the easiest path had been to look away. In this timeline, Arian Stormhold made sure that Miriam Hollows was never worn down. He made sure she had rest. He made sure she had assistance. He made sure she had nights off. He made sure she was not the only healer. He made sure that, when the test of her character finally arrived, she would be a Miriam who had not been broken in advance. This is the deepest foresight of all. Foresight is not punishing people for what they did when they were broken. Foresight is keeping them whole so they never break in the first place. Now I want to take you forward in time, not by years, by weeks, because I want to tell you about the day the second seer appeared. It was the 71st day after the Sky Tour, late winter. The household had grown to 43 people. The tunnel had been expanded into 3 of the original maintenance chambers. Arian had begun trading with 2 other settlements in the city, both of which had been founded by people he had quietly directed toward useful locations. He was, by this point, one of the 4 most powerful people in the post-collapse Seoul region, although only he and Wesley Brandt knew the full extent of it. He was standing on a rooftop. He had gone to the rooftop alone because he needed 5 minutes of sky. The sky, even after the tear, was still sometimes blue in the afternoons. He stood on the rooftop and he closed his eyes, and he let the cold wind move across his face, which is to say, beautiful in a way that made you suspect the beauty was a tool. She smiled at him. She said, "You are very good at this." He did not move. He said, "Who are you?" She said, "My name is Soraya Khan. I am the other one." He said, "The other what?" She said, "The other seer. There were 2 of us, you know. There were always 2 of us. The system did not give the gift to only 1 person. It gave it to 2. You simply did not know about me, because in your old life, I died on the 2nd day after the Sky Tour. I never had the chance to find you. This time, I had the chance." He looked at her. He looked at her for a long time. He said, "What do you want?" She said, "I want you to know that someone is watching. I want you to know that the Abyss King knows your name.
I want you to know that the next 5 years will not be the same as the last 5 years, because the Abyss King has also remembered, and the Abyss King is also preparing. I want you to know that the comfortable second life you are building in your tunnel is a delay, not a solution. And I want you to know that I am not your enemy. I am simply the only other person on this planet who understands what you are carrying. If you ever want to talk to someone who knows, you can find me. I will leave you away. She placed a small folded piece of paper on the edge of the rooftop. She turned. She walked to the other edge of the roof, and she stepped off. Arian ran to the edge. There was no body below. There was no sign of her. There was only the small folded paper, weighted by a stone, at the edge where she had stood. He picked up the paper. He unfolded it. There was an address written on it, and a date. The date was 3 months in the future. The address was a place he had not yet thought about. And below the address and the date, in handwriting that was almost laughing, were the words, "You are not alone. Try not to forget that." Arian Stormhold stood on the rooftop for a long time, and then he walked back down into the tunnel, and he went to the room where Sarah Lynn was reading a book about a rabbit who outsmarted a tiger, and he sat next to her, and he read with her until she fell asleep against his arm. The lesson of this story is the one I promised you at the beginning. The lesson is that the people who say, "If I had only known," are lying to themselves. The information was always there. The signs were always there. The face of the friend who would one day look away was the same face the entire time. The corporation that would buy your betrayer was already buying smaller betrayers in smaller corners of the world. The child who would one day save your life was already sleeping in a cardboard box 1 kilometer from your apartment, waiting for you to look down. Foresight is not magic. Foresight is the discipline of paying attention to the present so carefully that the future becomes legible. It is the discipline of noticing the homeless boy. It is the discipline of writing the names in the notebook. It is the discipline of opening the gate to the man who once killed you and giving him a chance to write a different story. Not because you forgive him, but because you are no longer the person who needs his forgiveness to be free. Arian Stormhold did not get a second life because the universe was kind. Arian Stormhold got a second life because, in his first life, he had finally understood that the lie, "If I had only known," was the lie that had cost him everything. And the universe, sometimes, gives us a second chance to stop telling that lie. But most of us do not get a second life. Most of us only get this one. And the question I want to leave you with tonight, the question that should follow you out of this video and into the rest of your week, is the question Arian Stormhold answered on the morning of the 7th day, with a notebook in his hand and a tunnel in his name and 4 people sleeping in rooms behind him. Who is the person you are walking past right now without seeing? Whose face have you stopped noticing because you have been telling yourself that you are too tired, too busy, too overworked to look down? Whose phone call have you been letting ring for the 3rd time this month? Whose name is already on the list that in 5 years you will look at and say, "If I had only known"? You already know. You have always known. The information is not hidden from you. The information is sitting at your kitchen table, walking past your front door, sleeping in the cardboard box 1 kilometer from your apartment. Look down. Look down before the sky breaks. My name is Luna, and I have been telling stories for longer than any of you have been alive. And I have told this particular story in 1,000 different shapes, in 1,000 different centuries, and the shape never changes. The shape is always a person who is given a gift they did not deserve, and the gift is always the same gift, which is the gift of seeing what was already there. And the question is always the same question, which is whether they will use the gift or whether they will go back to sleep. Arian Stormhold did not go back to sleep. The folded paper from the rooftop is still in his coat. The address on it is still 3 months in the future. The Abyss King is still preparing. Cassian Vale is still sleeping in his assigned quarters, dreaming of a brother he does not yet remember. Dren Karsh is still being weighed on a scale he does not understand. Miriam Hollows is still arranging bottles in the medical bay at midnight. Renzo Park is still waking up every morning surprised that the food has not been taken away. Sarah Lynn is still reading the book about the rabbit who outsmarted the tiger. Wesley Brandt is still checking the generator. The tunnel is still holding. The household is still standing. The second life is still being lived.
And somewhere, in a city that does not yet know it should be afraid, a young woman named Soraya Khan is sitting on a rooftop, watching the same sky Arian Stormhold is watching, smiling a smile that is not a smile. The next time you walk past someone you do not see, remember that the man in the story tonight only got a second chance because, in his last second of his first life, he understood that he had walked past them all. You have this second. You have this second right now. Look down, look around, see them. This is Luna, signing off, and I will see you in the next story, when the hunter who refused to awaken becomes stronger than every S rank combined. Until then, take care of the people you have not been seeing. The information has always been there. You have always known. Now go do something about it.